Dinosaurs in literature has resulted in some of the most experimental, strange, and interesting works and depictions of the prehistoric animals I have ever seen. So many new and outlandish ideas revolving around dinosaurs have been brought to life via books and short stories, made by authors who are definitely not afraid to explore beyond the boundaries of realism. And lately I've been getting more and more into these science fiction dinosaur short stories because of it. After digging around and randomly finding some of these stories, I knew I had to make a video on them. So I decided to pick out a few of these random sci-fi dinosaur short stories that I want to talk to you guys about today. So let's get into them. A Story Without an End. In 1901, an anthology book containing 18 stories and 2 poems was released, most of which were fantasy stories. However, some science fiction was included as well. This anthology, which was called Fancy Free, was written by English author Eden Phillpotts, who's written several novels, plays, and shorts from between the late 1880s to the mid-1950s. One of the science fiction short stories he wrote featured in Fancy Free, which was called A Story Without an End. The story begins in the Cambrian era, where life on land was non-existent until, of course, life from the water would begin to expand. The silence that would engulf the land would soon be disturbed when a pair of trilobites, one male and the other female, would emerge from the sea and spectate the new world. Then, all of a sudden, the male trilobite begins to speak. Despite the empty land being theirs to roam, the male trilobite ponders at the idea that they surely aren't the end of nature's line. The male trilobite says, "Sometimes in rare fits of modesty, I almost fancy that I am not the best that nature can do. I even picture something bigger, better, more beautiful than a trilobite. It may be morbid, but I do." To which the female trilobite responds, "This is nonsense and stuff, my dear. Nature never made anything better than a trilobite. Why? Because she can't. Can you picture anything different? Can you imagine any creature with more convenient limbs, more exquisite joints, more perfect claws, better eyesight, better senses, better manners, and more self-respecting? You know you can't." While the female trilobite insists that they are the best and last of what nature has to offer, the male is still left trying to picture the possibility of a future animal, one that is more advanced than themselves, doubting that they are the best nature can do. The story continues millions and millions of years later in the Mesozoic era. The land is covered with prehistoric vegetation and roamed on by the dinosaurs, with the most noticeable ones being the Brontosaurus excelsus. Meandering around a river's edge and feeding on nearby palms was a male and a female brontosaur. Despite being one of the largest and grandest creatures of their time, the male is still left wondering, and says to his partner, "This good world, the lakes and rivers, the trees and groves of club mosses, all, I sometimes think it can hardly have been made for us. Perhaps someday something greater, wiser, better even than Brontosaurus excelsus may browse here, and swim these rivers and lift its head to the sun." But the female doesn't feel the same way, responding by saying, "Is it possible to be greater than 100 feet long? Is it possible to be heavier than 50 tons? And for the rest, who should know your goodness and wisdom better than I? No, no, you let your humility run away with you, my sweet. You are the first and best, nature's masterpiece, her joy, her unutterable delights." Then the male Bronto brings up another one of nature's creation, the Atlantosaurus. In this world, known to be a cannibalistic monster to the Brontos. Just as its name is brought up in the conversation between the pair, one is spotted nearby, lurking within the trees. The Brontos make a run for it towards the river, disappearing under the water. Another several million years pass by, and we're transferred to the present, where Professor Jebway sits at his desk, reviewing his last monumental work in his hands. Despite his achievements in science, he wished he was born later when the world knew more. As his wife brings him tea, she brings up the idea that there is already too much to know as it is in their world. But Mr. Jebway disagrees and rants about how man is an incomplete and short-lived subject of nature. But Mrs. Jebway is insistent that nothing greater than man will ever roam the planet, and suggests for him to read the Bible instead of the scientific papers and books he subjects himself to. But Mr. Jebway sits there and continues to think, convinced that one day there will be something out there that will be better and wiser than themselves. Another several million years go by. What's there is the future, and what's in the future is simply known as the latest thing. The latest thing is described as pliable and pink, with a head like an overgrown vegetable marrow. His brain towered up into a cranial cavity lifted 3 feet above his face. His eyes twinkled like diamonds. He breathed through gills, and had a mouth merely rudimentary, for he lived by smell. Upon his back were wings of gauze, and when he moved, these became invisible, and he floated gently through the air. The latest thing sat there in his glass house, and as his wife came into the room, he mentally communicated with her, complaining about the slow progress of nature and how their children had not shown any signs of advancement yet. The latest thing's wife responded by telling him that was nonsense. "I tell you, we are the high water mark," she said. "The ultimate best, the triumph of creation, perfection." The story ends with the latest thing looking in disagreement, as he responds to his wife's comment by simply stating, "I doubt it." This short is a great example of how we as humans view ourselves in the grand scheme of things, how we hold ourselves to such a high pedestal as if we were going to be the most intelligent and advanced organisms to ever walk the earth. But it also shows how evolution and the natural progression of our world is a constant cycle that continues to function, hence why the short is called a story without an end. Death of the Moon. Amazing Stories is an American science fiction pulp magazine that was originally created in 1926 by American inventor and writer Hugo Gernsback, which he actually created through his media company known as Experimenter Publishing. Amazing Stories would prove to be a very unique and even revolutionary addition to the world of literature, as it was not only the first magazine to be fully focused on science fiction, but also the longest running one as well, having a 95-year run as of 2021 despite its many complications throughout its history. What's resulted of this are countless science fiction stories, with one of them being Death of the Moon, which was written by Alexander Phillips and would feature in the February issue of Amazing Stories in 1929. The story begins in a late Cretaceous North America, more specifically in a treeless plain with a few small bodies of water scattered throughout, all of which are positioned next to a raised cliff, followed by jungle and foliage atop. Standing on that cliff edge overlooking the field was the king of the dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus Rex. He spots a giant herbivorous dinosaur near one of these small bodies of water, presumably some type of sauropod, and he retreats back into the jungle to stay hidden and takes a familiar route that would lead him down to the bottom of the cliff where the plane stood. There he continued to stay low to the tall vegetation that stood by the base of the cliff. For a brief moment, the two stare at each other, before breaking the silence by charging at one another. Despite the herbivore's size, the Tyrannosaurus would be the victor in this prehistoric battle. Life on Earth at this point in time seems to be doing well enough for itself. However, the same cannot be said for the life forms inhabiting the moon. When the moon had first formed, it had cooled much quicker than its much larger planet counterparts, making it capable of supporting life much earlier. This life would come in the form of a race of large sapient insects with human-like intelligence that are referred to as lunarians in this short story. And they have lived on the moon their entire existence, surviving only on artificial food, water, and even air, since they are the only living organisms there. Most of the qualities they possess are attributed to that of normal insects, but they stand upright and are able to use tools and wear specific types of clothing and protection. Despite how long they lived here, the moon was beginning to die, as their resources such as natural gases, chemicals, and mineral ores used to produce their food and water source was quickly diminishing. Their only hope in saving their species is to leave their dying planet for a better one, which sounds oddly familiar. But this would take a lot of time and resources to complete, neither of which they had very much left of. And this all fell onto one individual, a Lunarian scientist and inventor who was the most intelligent and knowledgeable in this field. And he was considered to be their race's only hope in figuring out and building the technology necessary to get them off the moon and transport them to the adjacent planetary body, which was Earth. After years of work prior to this moment, the Lunarian inventor has been able to build said technology in the form of a ship, designed to take him and a crew of others on a speculation trip to Earth to ensure that it is livable for their race. Due to the time-sensitive nature of the situation, no trial runs were made for this ship. The Lunarians that were set on traveling to Earth on it simply had to hope that it would work on its first go, otherwise it could cost them their entire existence. The plan is for the inventor and a crew of other Lunarian scientists to take a speculation trip to Earth, and if all seems well, the inventor would then come back alone to oversee the completion of several other transporting ships to take the rest of their colony with them to Earth. The day would eventually come, and as the inventor and his scientist crew boarded the ship, the entire colony gathered around to watch their ascension. They would eventually depart in complete success and set their courses towards Earth. After some time, they would manage to complete the trip from their home moon to planet Earth, landing their ship somewhere in the field by the cliff in which the Tyrannosaur was at earlier. The Lunarians exited the ship and took in the new world, awing at their accomplishments of exploration. Despite their success, it was best for them to stay on Earth for a few days to study their area and ensure everything was fine for their great migration. However, their abrupt arrival to Earth had been witnessed by the Tyrannosaurus Rex, who was on top of the cliff and continued to watch as the Lunarians explored the land around them. The Rex would soon retreat back into the jungle, and as the Lunarians continued to explore the area around them, they would come across a gulch, which was the Tyrannosaurus's familiar route to get from the cliff to the plains. Seemingly out of curiosity, the Lunarians would follow the path up from the field towards the top of the cliff. The same would go for the Tyrannosaur, as it would instead travel down the path from the cliff towards the field. And soon, the inevitable would happen. The group of Lunarians and the Tyrannosaur would eventually cross paths. When one of the Lunarians noticed the dinosaur looking at them, he froze for a brief moment, before pulling out a laser gun to shoot at the possible threat. The laser shot hit the Tyrannosaur, leaving a nasty gash and angering the giant brute. The Rex would then charge at them and they would retreat down the path, but it was useless. The large dinosaur was much faster than them, so the only goal for them at this point was to ensure the safety of the inventor, for he was the only hope for their race. The group of Lunarians began to fire more laser shots at the Rex, scarring its body and making him weaker, but not enough to fully subdue the animal. The Tyrannosaur caught up to them and stomped, bit, and crushed the life of the entire group except for the inventor. Injured, the Rex stares at the inventor for a brief moment, and then charges. The inventor delivers one last shot from his laser gun, but fails to kill the dinosaur in time, and is hit from the side by one of the Rex's forelegs. While both are still alive, the inventor and the Tyrannosaur are fatally injured and lay there, as they wait for their inevitable demise. As the Rex would slowly die, the inventor takes one last look at the Cretaceous landscape, wondering why life would make it so far, only to end in destruction and extinction. The inventor would then die, failing his race as they eagerly waited for his return back at their home moon. Long they would wait. Long. Well, that story definitely ended on a more bleak note, but it's definitely one of the most interesting science fiction stories I've ever read. But as far as Death of the Moon goes, it's quite the contrast with other alien invasion stories, as most of the time those invasions are with malintentions. Whereas with this one, it was the sake of saving their race. But of course, this doesn't really give us an easy choice to side with, as their demise would eventually come from a natural force, a curious dinosaur simply defending its territory. Maybe that wasn't the intention, but for me personally, I was rooting for both, and in the end, both would end up being the end of each other, resulting in no real winners to this story and a very bleak ending. 10 out of 10. A Wish Upon a Star. Weird Tales is an American pulp magazine dedicated to covering the areas of fantasy and horror fiction in literature. In 1989, in their winter issue, a short story called A Wish Upon a Star would feature, which was written by Anne Goring. The story revolves around Billy, who's unfortunately facing the tragedy of dealing with his missing and possibly dead father. At the start of the story, Billy is at the Bone Pit, a muddy and swamp-like area within the woods near his neighborhood and where fossils of prehistoric animals were once discovered. But now it seems to serve as a dumping ground for garbage and litter. As interesting as the bone pit was, Billy was there as a way to escape from the reality of his situation. But of course, he couldn't help but think about it. It's here we learn that Billy's father was a generally kind man to everyone and was a loving father and husband. However, he worked on an oil rig which caused him to be gone overseas and would be the reason why he would go missing. During one of his work periods over at the oil rig, the violent seas would overtake his father from the structure. Billy is then left wondering why it had to be his father and not his father's friend Alan, who also worked at the same oil rig. Alan, being lonely and seemingly friendly, would be frequently invited over by Billy's father. However, it seems that Alan was taking advantage of his kindness. With Billy's father missing and presumed dead, Billy's mother is in a very vulnerable spot to which Alan fully intends to take advantage of. For this reason, Billy despises Alan. Darkness would begin to fall around the bone pit, indicating that maybe it was time for Billy to head back home. But before he did, he took one last look at the watery bottoms of the pit, even climbing down a bit to get slightly closer. In the process of doing so, he accidentally knocks a pebble into the water, which strangely causes it to sparkle with an intensity comparable to a diamond or even a star. This would possess Billy to make a wish. His thought process was that if people threw coins into fountains to make wishes, then surely a pebble that looked like a fossil tossed into a bone pit could have stronger effects, since fossils were surely more valuable than coins, right? Kind of weird logic there, but alright. He began to wish, and in his mind he pictured a pterodactyl flying over the open sea. In this vision of his, he saw his father's head poking out of the waters. The pterodactyl then goes towards him and snatches him out of the ocean with his talon, saving him from the violent seas. The vision ends with his father thanking him and telling him to go home now. But coming out of the vision, nothing looked different, but something had changed. Billy made his way home where he saw a red MG parked outside of his house. It was Alan's car. Billy went inside to find his mother being comforted by Alan and a couple of other neighbors, who was still very much worried for her missing husband. But Billy wasn't worried anymore. He knew what he saw in his vision, and he seemed to believe it. But something was telling him not to say anything about it. Alan temporarily decides to step out but promises to show up later to stay all evening with Billy's mother to continue comforting her. This makes Billy angry, and after a cold remark towards him, Alan makes his intentions very clear. He takes Billy to the hallway and tells him to get used to his new life with Alan around, for his dad was surely dead and Billy was going to have to tread carefully around him. After threatening and even physically hurting Billy, Alan then leaves, and in a fit of rage, Billy goes upstairs to make one final wish. This time, he pictured a dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus. Suddenly, he hears the trees shaking and the ground thundering outside of his bedroom window. The dinosaur emerged from the wooded area and into the street, where Alan was getting into his car. And just as the Tyrannosaur attacked the MG with Alan inside of it, a phone call can be heard downstairs. The phone is picked up by Billy's mother, who excitedly yells out to Billy that his father had been found by a helicopter. All at the same time, the Rex had been through with destroying Alan's car and presumably killing Alan in the process. The T-Rex disappears back into the woods, and looking back at the wreckage, the MG was mangled against a telegraph pole and a large truck was overturned nearby, making it look like it was the one to have caused a car accident. But Billy knew what really happened. The story ends at the bottom of the bone pits, where tiny points of light glinted one final time before being sealed off by the dark waters. This was definitely a stranger kind of story. It was one that felt like a dark kid's tale. To me, the whole idea of these dinosaurs within Billy's vision was more of an interpretation on the wild imaginations kids get, not just in general, but also when coping with real life tragedies, as escaping to your imagination is escaping the real world. For this story, all of the scenarios with dinosaurs could have been literal, but it could have also been made up in Billy's mind as well, allowing him to view the real world in his own way. His dad being rescued by the pterodactyl could have been his childlike equivalence to him being rescued by the helicopter. And Alan's car being attacked by the T-Rex could have been his childlike equivalence to Alan getting in a car accident. But of course, this is just my own personal interpretation of the story because, again, it's possible that the events within are supposed to be taken more literally instead of metaphorically. What do you guys think? The Dreams a Nightmare Dreams. For the final story that I'm going to take a look at today, we have The Dreams a Nightmare Dreams, written by the one and only Harlan Ellison, an American science fiction author who's written several novellas, short stories, screenplays, essays, and so on. Along with this, he was also known for his generally candid and straightforward attitude that often resulted in him having a more contentious and aggressive personality. However, he was considered to be a prolific figure in the world of literature, and his primarily science fiction works have been praised over the years, earning him several awards and recognition amongst the community. Some of his works include A Boy and His Dog, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and Slippage. Slippage, published in 1997, is an anthology book that contains several of Ellison's short stories, one of them being about dinosaurs, more specifically their extinction. Despite it being a very short story, it does bring up a very interesting idea, an alternative to how the dinosaurs really died. Ellison starts off by telling us that every possible theory that could explain the extinction of the dinosaurs is wrong. He tells us to forget the floods and the ozone depletion, the hurricanes and the earthquakes, and especially the meteor, as none of those are even close to what actually happened. What killed off the dinosaurs was no inanimate object, but rather some living creature, one in a deep sleep within the depths of the 6B Deep, a basin in the deepest part of the Gulf of Mexico. According to the story, it has no name, it has no kin, it has no home, it has no heart, it has no soul, it has no caring, and it has no fear. It is pure nightmare, and it killed the dinosaurs. What this creature isn't explicably known, nor where it exactly came from, but Ellison provides one possible idea. It was possible that this thing was born somewhere outside our area of space and time, and when a rip between fabrics of our universe and its, it managed to slip through and somehow made its way to our planet, falling through the skies 66 million years ago, impacting onto Earth and causing the crater that would become the Gulf of Mexico. According to the story, what followed was this. The vile horror that lay curled in that cosmic cradle, it reached out with its 100 minds, and it licked the surface of every brain it could find, no matter how large, no matter how small. It savored the worm, it tasted the fungi, it slobbered over the centipede. But when it found the thoughts of the dinosaurs, it knew fulfillment, a disgusting satiation. It could dominate if it could invade the minds of the saurians. But the dinosaurs fought back, and as a result of their rebellion against the eyeless horror, they perfected society and civilization. They fought back by dreaming intrusive dreams to combat the dreams of the nightmare that was under the deep sea. But it was to no avail. The eyeless horror had struck them, and they all died, with the nightmare leaving no trace of their civilization behind, because it had wished it so. The nightmare would then go into a dormant stage for millions upon millions of years, where it now dreams in our minds. Us, the inheritors of the saurian world as it is described in the book. As it continues to lay dormant, it is through our dreams the nightmare is able to enter and feed on our souls, so we must fight against it. And luckily, there are a few out there that are doing exactly that. Few that are aware of the nightmare's existence and continue to fight against it using their own intrusive dreams. But it may only be a matter of time before the nightmare awakes again. Well, this was a strange one to me, but considering the kind of person Ellison was, it's actually pretty fitting for his style of writing. Not that I've read a whole lot of Ellison's work, but let's be honest, this sounds like the writing of a contentious man. Regardless, I think it's a really interesting dive into a more science fiction alternative to the dinosaurs' extinction, because this was obviously not something that Ellison actually took as a plausible idea. At least, I think he didn't. And that was a look into a few strange and random dinosaur short stories that I wanted to share with you guys today. Let me know in the comments down below which one was your favorite, and if you guys have any more dinosaur short stories that you want me to cover here on the channel. Huge thanks to Necro for helping me out with the artwork once again. Check out his links in the description down below, along with where you can find all of these short stories to read for yourselves. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please, have a nice day.